All right, welcome to section 9. In section 9, we're going to be taking a look at long-lived assets. In this section, we're going to help you understand what long-lived assets are, the different categories of long-lived assets, and then from a financial standpoint, how do we report the acquisition of it, then the use of that asset, and then finally the disposition of that asset in our book. So we're going to look at how do we do that from a financial accounting standpoint. Now, in this lesson specifically, we're going to help you understand what long-lived assets are and the different categories of long-lived assets we have that companies use to acquire these assets. So that's what we're going to be looking at in this lesson. So let's get started by helping you understand what long-lived assets are. So long-lived assets are defined as assets that a company acquires for which it uses or lasts for 1 year or longer or more years. So typically we're looking at assets that actually last for longer than 1 year, not within 1 year. So supplies would not be a long-lived assets because we would expect supplies to be used in 1 year or less. So that's what we're looking at there. Now, in addition to that, long-lived assets are not assets in which we would expect to resell to a customer. So if it's considered inventory, then we don't include that in long-lived assets. Now, an example of this may be that you are a manufacturer of equipment for agriculture, which are theoretically long-lived assets. So if you buy a tractor, that would last for longer than 1 year. So typically that would be a long-lived asset. Unless you manufacture them and the whole goal is to manufacture them and then sell them to your customers, then that tractor is not a long-lived asset. It is considered inventory. So as we look at this, we're looking at things that a company would actually use in their daily operation to generate revenues, to generate sales. That's what we're talking about when we talk about long-lived assets. So even though things might be considered long-lived assets for a company that maybe manufactures them, it's considered inventory and is not included in the definition of a long-lived asset. Now, we have 3 types or 3 categories of long-lived assets that we can take all of these long-lived assets and put them in. And so helping you understand what these categories are is important because we sometimes treat the financial aspect a little bit differently from all 3 of them. So the first one here is the tangible assets. Tangible assets are assets that you can actually physically touch. They have a physical substance to them. So because they have these physical substance to them, we consider them tangible assets. They're also known as fixed assets. So examples of fixed assets would include equipment, land, as well as buildings. So those would be our tangible assets. The next type of assets that we have are intangible assets. Intangible assets are assets that you can't theoretically touch. They don't have a physical substance to them. So examples of these intangible assets include brand names, trademarks, copyrights. You can't really physically touch them. They do have value to the company that has acquired them though, but you can't touch them. So for instance, when we think about a logo might actually be worth a lot of money to a company, and as such is very valuable and is considered an intangible asset. We'll talk more about that at the end of this section. The third type that we're not really going to be talking about a lot in this section is our natural resources. Our natural resources are assets that are in nature and that the regeneration occurs in Mother Nature. So, although we have maybe a little bit of hand in that natural resources, some of these natural resources, they just regenerate itself through Mother Nature. So examples of this would be timber, oil, coal. These are things that are regenerated by the earth and Mother Nature doing its thing. So those are natural resources. We're not going to talk a lot about those in this section, but that's another class of long-lived assets that the company might have. Now, for companies, long-lived assets represent some of the biggest numbers on their balance sheet. So if we look at Target, for instance, in Target's case here, if we look at their balance sheet, we notice that their total assets, also all of their assets, is $38,999,000 or $39 billion, but a significant high portion of that $39 billion is their property, and equipment, which would be tangible, long-lived assets. So we don't have any intangibles here, but we do have tangible, long-lived assets. And those tangible, long-lived assets are 25 billion. So that is a significant amount of their total assets. And most companies will invest heavily in their long-lived assets because it helps them do their business, helps them generate revenues and sales. And without that, we really don't have a lot to help us generate those revenues automatically. So $25 billion of the 39 billion is long-lived assets. So a very important percentage of a company's total assets. Now, in this section, we're going to help you understand the acquisition, the retention, and the disposition of those tangible, long-lived assets. Now, at the very end of this section, we're going to talk a little bit about intangible assets. So we're going to help you understand what intangible assets are. The way that we put them into our books is going to be the same, similar to that of tangible assets. So we're not going to do that whole phase of helping you understand how do we acquire them, how do we retain them, how do we dispose of them, because it's very much like our tangible assets. So we're just going to introduce you to some of the intangible assets that you're maybe not familiar with, and then we won't cover anything on natural resources. So that's what we're looking forward to in this section. So that is a look at an introduction to long-lived assets. Specifically, we're helping you understand that we have different types of long-lived assets. We have our tangible assets, we have our intangible assets, and we also have our natural resources. And for companies, this makes up a big portion of their balance sheet. So it's super important that we take a look at this and that you understand it at the very end. So hope you enjoyed this lesson, and we'll see you in the next video. Hey guys, if you like this video, make sure you press the like button below. And if you're looking for worksheets that go along with all of these lessons, head over to my website at patrickleemsa.com or clicking the link in the far right. And I've got your next lesson right over here. So just click that link and it'll take you to that video. So until then, we'll see you in the next lesson.